Good morning, everybody, and thank you. Thank you for inviting us here to talk to you. Thank you for letting us represent you in Washington. I'm here with Langston Emerson from our firm. There are other folks back in D.C. that are not here that also work on your behalf. Rob Chamberlain, Julie Bodeson, John Black. I think you've met John and Julie, and I know you know Rob as well, who was down here a couple months ago when we first talked to you folks. I thought what we would do, if it's okay with you, is to talk a little bit first about the FAA bill and what's going on with that, and then we could get into the institution and the politics, and Langston will go through those aspects as well. But I think what you should know in terms of the way we function and the way our firm functions is we work as a team. So whatever issues you have for us, let us know and we will run those to ground. I mean, a lot of the things that we are looking at now deal with the FAA reauthorization bill, which I know is important to you, the provisions in that, what happens with it. With that, I'll talk about that, and then Langston will get into the other stuff. With respect to the FAA reauthorization bill, there are a number of provisions that are important, from contract towers to professional facility charges, to really what happens with the bill, the Small Community Airport Development Program, and the funding for all of those programs. What has happened to date is the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee met on February 11th and favorably reported out a piece of legislation that reauthorized the programs of the FAA through 2022. The bill passed through the committee along party lines, 32-26, which is not exactly a good sign, frankly. There have been a lot of bipartisan discussion about a lot of the bill, but there's one critical issue where the Democrats and Republicans disagree with each other, and that has to do with the air traffic control system and whether or not to privatize it. And the reason, and the industry is split as well. There are three major carriers in favor of it, Delta's opposed, there are the general aviation community is either on the fence or opposing, NACTA, the controllers union, is in favor, the pilots union, ALPA, is against. So you had a mismatch of clashes within the industry, and then recently the Heritage Foundation, the right side of the political spectrum, came out against it, that it didn't go far enough for privatization, and it provided too much funding for things like essential air service in small communities. So you have that dynamic that's going on. The next step for the House committee is to go through the House floor, and right now, as near as we can tell, they don't have the votes to pass it. So that bill may stall, and it will depend on what Chairman Schuster wants to do. If he takes out the air traffic control piece, the rest of the bill will move. But he may not want to do that. So nobody knows yet. But he not only has those groups aligned in different places, but he has the House Appropriations Committee has come out against the bill. The Ways and Means Committee, which has the tax jurisdiction, has also had some problems because the way the bill works is when they take the ATC out of the FAA, an enormous chunk of the budget goes with it. So, and that is supposed to go from a tax system, when we pay our taxes, the ticket tax goes into trust fund, they can change that to a fee system, which means the House Ways and Means Committee has to come up with a plan to deal with that. And it's a budgetary issue. How much money is it going to cost the government to do that? There are, in our crazy world of Washington, they call them scoring issues. So the fact that this air traffic control system still needs billions and billions of dollars, once you take it and put it in another box, you need to make up for that money, even though the money is still being used to pay for it. I've never, we've had this problem for years, and it is you can't figure it out logically, so don't try. Just know that there is a problem there from a budgetary standpoint. With respect to the Senate is now working on its version of the bill, which we anticipate that they will unveil probably in early March and then hold a markup as early as March 9th. The funding for the FAA runs out March 31st, so Congress is going to have to pass what we believe to either be a short-term extension 30, 60, 90 days to give them more time to negotiate, or they may just throw in the towel and say, let's wait until after the new election cycle and we will do it for a year. But that hasn't been decided yet, but those conversations are going to be happening or are happening now. So that's some of the political dynamic that we're dealing with in terms of the FAA, and I know that there are a lot of specific issues in the bill. The House actually did a good job on some things. They did a very good job in increasing money for the airport improvement program from $3.35 billion to about $4 billion over that 5-6 year window. But they did not increase the passenger facility charges, which I know was an issue. So that is still up in the air. The ATC piece, going back to that for a second, the question of what happens with contract towers, which I know is important to the community. I'm not sure yet what all of that means, because once you put air traffic control into a different box and how it's run, and the board is made up of the carriers, the question of what gets paid for and what's included is still an open question. So other things to sort through. And with that, I think I'll let Langston talk about the politics, the institution generally, and what's been going on. And then we can get back into questions if that's okay.
Well, first, thank you all for the opportunity to speak before you. I know many of you know Sam and other colleagues of mine and his that have worked with you all in the past, so I thought I would take a brief moment to introduce myself since this is the first time I've been before you. Or just by way of introduction, again, my name is Langston Emerson. I joined the B in December of 2015. Primarily to lead and work on financial services, but as Sam mentioned earlier, it's a very collaborative effort in any way that I can be helpful and will help for you in the future. That's what I plan to do, which is why I think it's good for me to be here today. I had several years working in the House and Senate in Washington, D.C., and have been a lobbyist and a strategic advisor for Fortune 100 companies in the private equity industry for over 13, 15 years. So I'm well suited to work with Sam and his good team, and I look forward to working with you all as well. So Sam talked a lot about the specifics of the FAA bill and what's happening in particular committees as they preside. But I think for me, and my perspective for you all is to kind of set a level stage for the 50,000-foot view of what's happening within DC moving forward, how that impacts the FAA bill and other activity that could potentially get done or not in Capitol Hill. So, I mean, as many of you know, and I know that I will be saying things that you already know. You hear about what's happening with the Justice Scalia recently. His death has took a lot of oxygen out of the room as it relates to what gets done in Capitol Hill. There's a lot of discussion as to whether after the president nominates somebody, will that person actually get a fair hearing, or whether that person will be approved. And that will take a lot of oxygen out of the room. It's very political. As many of you know, the House, while the campaigns are up and going, that the likelihood of that actually flipping sides and Democrats taking over power is less likely and probably not likely at all. Whereas the Senate is very contentious, and it's up to perhaps as whether as Democrats take over. So because the approval of a justice occurs in the Senate, the likelihood that this will take place this year is probably slim to none. Nonetheless, it causes a lot of friction amongst the Democratic senators and Republican senators, and issues that are relevant to you all, and quite frankly, issues that are relevant to the country are likely to be on standstill for a while. There's also the issue of the Flint, Michigan issue, the water issue. That's caused a lot of concern amongst members on the Democratic side and Republican side in the House and Senate. And they've been working quite a bit to look at ways to provide more service and provide more money, quite frankly, to the city of Flint. That has become a problem, obviously, for political reasons. Also, because of elections, it's caused a lot of turmoil and quite frankly has disrupted the legislative process. So that will also filter into what is able to get done or not done. It takes a lot of oxygen in the room, out of the room. And then you have the overarching issue of the presidential election. So you have a lot of individuals who are not currently in office who are making a lot of statements and suggestions about how they would govern if and when they make it into office, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side. That has a big impact on what is done on Capitol Hill. Whether it's Republican, House, Senate, individuals in the members of Congress definitely look and take their cues to some degree based on what their presidential candidates, especially the ones that are in the lead, are saying. So all of that to be said, I mean, there's not a lot that looks to be done outside of what is absolutely necessary. whether it's the confirmation of a justice, whether it's providing more funding to Flint, whatever it may be, there's just the likelihood of that being possible, or working on FAA and other issues that are relevant to you all. Committee activity is very relevant, and it will happen. It will set the groundwork for what could potentially get done in 2017 and beyond. But the likelihood of things moving forward and being signed into law by the current president is very slim. There's not many legislative days. Sam and I were just talking momentarily a few minutes ago. You know, after the conventions in July, there are discussions about them not coming back into session at all. And if they do, it may be for something absolutely necessary. So the likelihood, you're looking at a window of maybe under 50 days where they have a short period of time to get a lot done. That is what's just necessary. Keeping the lights on, so finding out how they're going to figure out the budget and for the Congress and the government agencies and moving them. So the likelihood of us seeing a lot happen beyond that is pretty slim. So I think Sam mentioned, quite frankly, a lot of what's happening at committee level. We're watching that. He's monitoring it. Our staff are monitoring it. But at the end of the day, it's groundwork that's going to be laid for what's to happen in 2017.
Questions?
Just one. The atmosphere, the disruption, the potential of things not moving, how does that mirror what you've experienced in past years? Is this something new, different? What does it look like in terms of now versus in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I've got gray hair, so
It's just not up top.
This seems harder. I mean, we haven't had, the Supreme Court issue throws things really on a different track than before, and it is likely, I mean, in the Senate they have fought over judges for a long time, and has caused a real rub on what the procedures are in the Senate, and has caused a lot of bad blood at different times. This one could get uglier than past years. I mean, you could have a situation where each side is trying to position and blame the other for not doing something. So the Democrats will say, look, we're not going to do anything. This is one scenario. We're not going to do anything unless we have that hearing and have the ability to vote on a nominee. And the Republicans will then, and the Democrats will then try and block bills. The Republicans will then say, well, you guys are being obstructionist. So the political debate and discourse and the ad war that's going to occur is going to be blaming each other for not getting something done. And that's a matter of positioning for both parties, and it is going to be difficult. You know, for instance, they had fully intended before the justice passed away that they were going to do regular order for the appropriations bills, which is also important because that will provide the cash for the FAA and for TSA and other agencies. That's now up for grabs how that process works. They may go through committee, but they won't go through the Senate or House floor. Because there will likely be too many amendments that will be political bombs. So all of that is going to wait until December, if not later. So it really has thrown a different curve that I've seen.
The only thing I would add to it is I think if it wasn't a presidential year, I think things would be kind of just as disruptive, but I think because of the presidential election, it makes it even more. I think there are a lot of undertones outside of the political rhetoric and bombs that are being thrown around left and right. The undertones are, when you look at Flint, when you look at what Justice Scalia for some stood for and how he wrote his dissents or what have you, and what he believed as a strict constitutionalist, if you will. There are a lot of undertones about racial divide. There are a lot of undertones about income inequality. There are a lot of undertones about women's rights. And when we look at the Constitution and what it means to get somebody else in the Supreme Court, that the current president will take over someone if it was a Republican president. There's a lot of discussion and quite frankly a lot of rhetoric that comes from presidential candidates that you won't necessarily hear from members of Congress. But it's an undertone that quite frankly I think has permeated the body, the Congress, and it has had some impact on their ability to work together. It's had an impact. I've seen it, I've talked to members directly, who have been frustrated by the undertones, not necessarily what's said publicly, but the state of affairs and how people are reacting to them, quite frankly off the record more so than on the record. So I think that has an impact, and the presidential election doesn't help. My fear, and I know we think this as well, is that it could get so bad as we near the presidential election that the disruption will carry over, and depending on how the elections go, could be even worse going into 2017 than they are now. Because the damage can only be repaired so much based on what you say and do in this time frame. So hopefully the rhetoric can calm down after two candidates are chosen and we kind of deal with issues that are at hand as opposed to throwing bombs left and right in order to hurt somebody. Hopefully that could prove beneficial and less damaging moving into 2017.
Gentlemen, one of the things that's really important to an airport our size has to do with the pilot shortage. I didn't hear you mention anything about that issue as part of the FAA reorganization. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the numbers are pretty staggering in terms of the number of pilots that the major airlines will need and the number of retirements that are forthcoming because of the age 65 rule. And what the industry right now is trying to do is say to the FAA, we have a problem because of legislation that was passed that required 1,500 hours for any new pilot before they could get in the right seat of a commercial plane. The intention of that legislation was to make sure the pilots were better trained. The way it is actually playing out is when a student gets out of school, they now need to spend another year or two flying around to earn hours. That has, according to the regional carriers, really cut off the traditional supply of pilots. You also have less pilots coming out of the military right now, so their ability to hire is really getting hit hard. There are claims by the Colgan families that there are 20,000 eligible pilots who can come into the system. Well, that number is not actually correct at all. I mean, that includes people that fly around for fun all the time. And so what the regional airlines are trying to do right now is to get the FAA to look at alternative pathways for that restricted ATP license, which we think will not only provide a better trained pilot, but will get the students or new pilots into the system much earlier than they would otherwise be allowed. But I mean, I know I've talked to a number of carriers, a number of other groups about it, and it is a growing problem that we are trying hard to solve because it affects all the regional market more than anything else. So stay tuned.
How would you solve that? Because if they need 1,500 hours so that they have the experience, how else would they get that experience if they did not have the 1,500 hours and they're flying 300 and 400 people on these big planes? That, how would the people feel safe?
So here, the issue of hours versus quality of training has always been debated amongst, the safety people. Because they picked 1,500, which is what you need for a captain, the way it used to work, you'd sit in the right seat with a certain number of hours. You couldn't move over to the other seat until you really had been through that training process and you learned in a structured program how to fly a regional jet, for instance. And then you could possibly move over. The way it's working now is you get the 250 hours credit, for instance, coming out of a university program. You now have to fly around for 1,250 hours. You're not flying in a regional jet. You're not being trained in a structured program. You may be doing flight schools, you may be doing other things, but your skill level is different.
I see.
And so what the regionals are trying to say is, let us bring the new pilots in quicker. We will put them in a structured program with really sophisticated simulators. We will check rides, do all of those things, but give us some credit for that, so that that student doesn't have to have 1,250 hours flying around, as a flight instructor. And frankly, the flight instructor route isn't a bad one, but if you think about it, most flight instructors, they're only flying in good weather. They're only flying under certain conditions because of insurance and all sorts of other reasons. So what you want is a structured program. I mean, you want the most sophisticated program you can get for new pilots. And the regionals are really the pathway into the major carriers to the hiring process. So if the majors are going to need 20,000, 30,000 pilots, and the regionals only have 18,000 pilots total. So there's a number of problems, there's a structural problem, and there's a training program. So, but in fairness, the regional carriers actually came up with a really solid plan that a lot of people like, but we need the FAA to take a look at it.
I think the important takeaway is that we're still struggling to get it into the FAA reauthorization bill. And so it's not in the current House bill.
Right.
And we're going to need to work with the Senate side in order to get this done, or once it gets to the floor, some amendments would have to be made to it in order to make sure that language gets in there. And so Sam spoke, very clearly, about the Kogan families who have a lot of influence, and they're at every meeting that they talk about making a change here. They're very focused on the 1,500 hours as opposed to efficiency. And so organizations like AAA and others are working to try and get a face-to-face meeting with the leaders of the Kogan family in order to try and get over that hurdle. But that's been a struggle so far.
Yeah. And they have been, the family's been very vocal that they stand by the law and don't want to see any changes. So what is being asked is not to change the law, but to change the ability of the FAA to look at other plans within the 1,500 requirement. So, and that will all unfold in the next several weeks, hopefully.
Gentlemen, thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chairman, President, Commissioners, our next presentation has to do with the passenger demand study